So, how are you all doing this week? I've been looking at the news and I want to crack on with it before we welcome in our first guest. I want to start off with a story that we led with last week, Madeleine McCann. No sooner had I finished last week's Raw report in which I said the German authorities were failing to nail Christian Bruckner, their prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, then a new suspect is announced. Only this new suspect is an old suspect who was previously interviewed, and conveniently, he's another German offender. I would like to point out that the original Portuguese coordinator, Gonzalo Amaral, called this over a year ago when he spoke to Australian journalist Mark Sonokonoko for Mark's brilliant Madeleine podcast series. I can't recommend it enough. I do actually appear in it, but that's not the reason I'm recommending it. Now, Amaral said he was convinced that they would find a German patsy for the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, and it's increasingly looking as if he was right. Mark, for anyone who doesn't know, was a guest on the first ever Raw report, and his interview is available online and well worth a watch. So Amaral called it, and the police seem to be steering it in that direction. This week, suspect is Martin Ney, a child killer who is currently serving a life sentence after he murdered 3 young boys. It would appear that Scotland Yard, who have the 13 million plus Operation Grange investigation into Madeleine's disappearance, are planning to interview Ney for a second time. Operation Grange, it should be noted, claim they are still running a missing person investigation into Madeleine's disappearance, even though German prosecutors and Portuguese police, who also have different Madeleine investigations, both believe that Madeleine is dead. So the only police force currently claiming that Madeleine is alive is the British one. Personally, having researched the case from the beginning, I am in no doubt that Portuguese police who believe that Madeleine died in the apartment are closer to the truth than their British counterparts. And personally, again, I barely have any faith in Operation Grange from the beginning, as it seemed that the scope of their investigation was extremely limited. I interviewed former Met detective Colin Sutton for one of my Madeleine documentaries, and he was clear that the investigation was problematic, with police instructions being not to look at the parents and their friends who were there, which of course makes absolutely no sense for anyone who knows anything about missing child cases, because almost 1 in 8 missing children are known to their abductors. So back to Martin Ney. Well, the newspapers are conveniently helping the police find a patsy by telling us that Ney will not only be interviewed about Madeleine, but about an assortment of unsolved children's murders. This is exactly what the police and media did about Christian Bruckner. Why are police and media so determined to convince people that these German men are responsible? Let's be clear. Both Ney and Bruckner are repugnant and dangerous to others, but are any of them responsible for the disappearance of Madeleine McCann? It is my opinion, and based on extensive research, they are not. However, that doesn't stop them being put in the frame. Madeleine McCann was reported missing almost 14 years ago. It is a case that has been beset with political, legal, and media interference. The people who were there have never fully cooperated and didn't even do a police reconstruction. Some people have contacted me this week following last week's Raw report. They have concerns that Portugal's 15-year limit on prosecutions means there is just over 1 year left to take action in the case of missing Madeleine. I'm awaiting a response from Portuguese authorities to check whether this applies to this case. But let's not forget, it's a most unusual case, and the things that usually apply seldom do when it comes to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. I want to move on to the BBC indoctrination. If you're just joining me, hello, I'm Sonia Poulton, journalist and broadcaster, and welcome to the Raw Report. My next story, BBC indoctrination. I want to look at the BBC. As many people know, I have deep concerns about the long-term propaganda that the BBC has been responsible for, and not least because we were recently informed that it would be supplying a significant amount of education while children are in lockdown. This week, the corporation has been forced to remove a film aimed at 9 to 12-year-olds following a barrage of complaints from parents and carers, and not before time. The film, Identity, Understanding Sexual and Gender Identities, was offered on the Beebs website as part of its relationships and sex education guidance, and it told children that there were more than 100 gender identities. Fairly reprehensible and confusing stuff for children, and despite recent government guidance, which has advised schools to exercise caution when teaching children about gender issues, the BBC, though, has been captured by the gender lobby, pushing their born in the wrong body ideology on young minds. And the programme featured children asking adults about sexuality and gender and talking about being bigender, genderqueer and pansexual. The film tells children that becoming transgender is a way to be happy, while failing to mention the very serious rulings from judges regarding the Keira Bell trial and the dangers of giving puberty blockers to children. It should also be noted at this point that last week, the NHS Tavistock Centre, which treats gender-confused children, was branded inadequate by a watchdog. The BBC film includes a pupil asking how many gender identities there are, to which Kate, described as a relationship and sex education teacher, responds, "There are so many gender identities, so we know we have got male and female, but there are over 100, if not more, gender identities." The film also shows an adult called Rachel telling the children, some people might be born and feel they are the wrong gender. They might be born as a girl and feel like they are a boy. This is dangerous stuff to be telling young and impressionable minds, and not least because of the guidance that was issued last by the Department of Education. It's very serious what they said. The gender lobby need to sit up and pay attention. The BBC were not happy. They said that more than 50 teachers participated in consultation exercises which helped to inform the series. What the hell is wrong with those teachers? We know for a fact that not only the BBC, but our education establishment has been institutionally captured by the gender lobby to promote this ideology to children. Just to be clear, I fully support children being encouraged to be unconventional, to dress how they want, wear their hair how they want, basically to ignore gender norms, which are regressive and always have been. However, this stuff is indoctrination, which anyone who has studied the gender lobby knows is financially supported by wealthy and famous people whose roles seem to be to confuse children and to put them onto a pathway of being medicalized and eventually having their healthy body parts removed because they have been encouraged to believe they are born in the wrong body. It's child abuse, plain and simple, and BBC are part of it. It's good they took down that film, but they should never have put it up in the first place. My advice is to keep an extra watch on the BBC, and particularly while they're influencing your children in lockdown. I want to look at quarantine hotels now before I bring in our first guest. Last week, we heard from people who had been forced to take private tests in order to fly when they were told their NHS test and trace tests were inadequate. I asked if anyone else had experienced this, and it turns out that yes, people have. So that's where we're at. Test and trace, in which a multitude of companies benefit under the banner of NHS, including Amazon, is seen as inferior to private tests. So why, one must ask, are we spending billions on a system that even airlines aren't happy with? Ah, well, that's Boris Johnson sorting out his corporate mates. And let us not forget that lockdown has become increasingly expensive this week with the announcement of quarantine hotels. Despite locking down the UK since last March, government allowed people to travel in and out of the country at will, and a year on, they have found new ways to stiff us Brits. Boris Johnson announced that mandatory quarantine hotels would be introduced for arrivals from 30 high-risk countries. And unlike other countries such as New Zealand, who have introduced quarantine hotels for free, UK arrivals will have to spend 10 days in quarantine at their own expense. The estimated cost is around $1,500. Couples staying together may benefit from a reduced rate of about $2,000. Interestingly, there's been much talk from the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, about social media influencers traveling off to Dubai for pleasure. Well, guess what? The new announcement is that any British and Irish citizens traveling from United Arab Emirates will not have to use the hotels but can isolate at home. Why the discrepancy? Who knows? I'm told quarantine hotels will be reviewed in 2 weeks' time. What a bloody nightmare. Now, let me welcome our first guest. I can already see him on the screen.